Good morning and welcome. I'm Sherry Schwab, the Building Industry of Washington's, known as BIW, 2020 President. It was an exciting day yesterday to hear Governor Inslee authorize Phase 1 and the immediate restart of residential construction in Washington State. Getting that announcement took weeks of work. We had nearly 1,300 safety pledges from you to the governor. We had an outpouring of support from local, state, and federal officials. Our local associations, the BIW staff, and the BIW senior officers all participated by constantly working to get the authorization for Phase 1. Special recognition goes to Greg Lane, BIW's Executive Vice President, and his staff for their persistence and collaboration with other partners. It's not often that organized labor and the private sector agree, but it was a unanimous decision that construction and housing are essential in Washington, and we needed to get back to work in order to support the housing industry. Thank you to everyone for the incredible unity. This has been an incredibly difficult month for all of us, members, leadership, BIW staff, and local associations. We celebrate the ability to return to work under the Phase 1 guidelines, but let me stress that we have many challenges ahead of us. Work continues on Phase 2 and the ability to open projects. Throughout this entire trying episode, the leadership and the staff at BIW have been working tirelessly to educate Governor Inslee about how our industry can keep employees safe and the public safe while continuing to produce housing that is so needed in our state, and to keep people employed and off of unemployment, and to support the state's economy. We also now have a huge responsibility to follow the procedures as outlined to protect ourselves, our workers, our loved ones, and our communities. This is not a time to do business as usual or to take shortcuts. Our health and also our success in paving the way for other industries to find safe solutions to return to work depends on our vigilance. And now it is up to you. Today's webinar will help you learn exactly what Phase 1 construction means, the on-site requirements, and the new safety precautions. I'd like to introduce Greg Lane, BIW's Executive Vice President, to start with an overview of today's program. Greg?
Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. And Sherry, I really want to thank you and the BIW senior officers and the other leaders around the state, especially at the local associations too. This was truly a collective effort to get to the point we got to yesterday, where the governor opened things up. It was we had a lot working against us, and it has been a long month and a huge fight to get here. But you all the officers were very active participants in that, provided tremendous leadership to our organization. So thank you very much for that. Good morning to everybody else. Welcome. Really glad you could be with us on Saturday morning. We're doing our best to try and get information out to you as quickly as possible so that you can get back onto your sites, complying with all the new requirements as quickly as you can. So that's what this webinar this morning is all about. We're going to do 3 different presentations over the hour-and-a-half period. I'm going to first start kind of walking through the Phase 1 requirements. As you know, the governor talked about a few of them yesterday in his news conference, but we'll go through the document kind of step by step, and I'll try and provide some clarification and explanation. I was part of the working group representing BIW during the negotiations with the unions that were on the other side of the table, a couple other business associations that were represented, and then working with Department of Health, Labor and Industries, and the governor's office. So I can try and help provide as much clarification as I can as we go. After that, we have Joseph Irons. Joseph is one of our senior officers and an active remodeler. up in the King County area, and he has been implementing this stuff in his company for a long time. So he's going to talk about what they've done to comply, how they've adapted their procedures and policies and practices on the job site to put everything in place to be back at work. So he'll go through that and talk about what they've done in their business and show you some examples of things that you can do to make sure you're in compliance. And then finally, we'll turn it over to Jackson Maynard, who is our general counsel at BIAW. Jackson will talk about the enforcement piece of this, how that will work, how we expect it to work, and walk you through some questions we've been getting surrounding that, and then we'll wrap up the session and be done by 11 o'clock this morning. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, and I want to walk you through how that's going to work. We've got about 500 people on this webinar, so we can't just open it up for everybody to ask questions. So we put a process in place, and at the end of each section, so after I'm finished, after Joseph's finished, and after Jackson's finished, we will take questions before we move on to the next presentation. And the way that you can do that is in the chat feature. You're going to select Hannah Markley in the chat, and you're going to type in your questions to Hannah. Hannah is our assistant general counsel at BIAW, and she's going to kind of manage through all the questions that we get throughout the presentation, and then she will select kind of based on the number of similar inquiries we get, and she will actually ask the questions of us when we're done with our presentations, and we'll do 5 or 6, kind of depending on how much time we have at each one. But we'll also keep a record of every question, and we will do our best over the next couple days to get back to you and answer your question if we don't have time to get to it today. I also want to remind everybody we are videotaping this, and we will post the entire webinar on the BIAW website, so you can go back and view it again if you want to clarify or didn't catch something, go back and review, or share it to your other builders that that weren't able to join us today. They'll be able to access it and watch it on the BIAW website. So that's how the process will work. As I'm going through, please send your questions in through the chat, but I'm going to start off by running through a bit of some of the requirements that we did. I want to start just by saying, this. I know that there are a number of different requirements that we had to agree to get this phase 1 construction started. As I mentioned, it was a group that we had to sit down and participate in and negotiate with, and it was dealing with Department of Health, it was dealing with L&I, it was dealing with the governor's office, and quite frankly, it was dealing with a governor who did not want construction to be taking place. And so, we really had to sit down and make it clear that, that we were committed to doing safe practices to protect employees, to even get the governor to consider at all reopening construction. So keep that in mind as we went through. My goal in the process was, I knew there were going to be extra requirements. I tried to provide as much flexibility for you all so that you could comply with them and have enough flexibility to do as much as possible on your job site throughout phase 1. And I think we were able to accomplish that for the most part. There's some things that I wasn't happy with, getting into the end of the document, but it was, a negotiated process. And in the end, for us, the exciting part was that we got you back to work before the stay-at-home order ended, and it is going to be extended. So we were excited about that. And I think it says a lot that construction is the first business entity, first industry to be opened up to start again as well. So, I think in the end, we were successful in accomplishing our goal, which was getting you back working again on your job sites. So let me walk through a little bit of some of the requirements and touch upon them. If you have other questions, as I said, send them into Hannah and we will get to those. But I want to start just with what is phase one? What is phase one work? And phase one work really is defined by two primary things. The first is it is not project specific. So, and there is a lot of confusion out there about this. It's not a project by project definition. It's work being done on the job site and the safety risk associated with that work. And the way that we ended up defining that was low risk was any work that could be done accommodating the 6-foot social distancing requirement. So phase one, low risk, is any work that can be performed on a job site that doesn't require people to be closer than 6 feet. If the work requires people to work within 6 feet, or if you are doing work on the job site and people are working closer than 6 feet, that is not allowed. And if L&I comes in and inspects and sees your folks on the job site and they're working closer than 6 feet, that's a violation. So it's any work, but workers need to keep that 6-foot barrier at all times. And then the second part of the definition was it had to be existing construction projects. And existing is a broad term, and I know there's some confusion. We've got a lot of questions about what that means. The way that the governor's office has decided what it means is they're going to leave it up to local jurisdictions. And our definition of it that we're encouraging local jurisdictions to adopt, and the governor's office is fine with, is any project that was permitted prior to the stay-at-home order in place. So if you got a permit prior to the stay-at-home order, that's an existing construction project, and that's what we'll be encouraging local jurisdictions in terms of how to define it. Some local jurisdictions may define it a little tighter. I know there's some out there that that are defining it by work having had to have started, actually, quote unquote, shovel in the ground on a site to be existing. And the governor's office will support that. They're not going to step in and tell them, no, it has to be permitted. So they are going to leave it up to the local jurisdiction, but we're going to strongly encourage and work with our local associations to strongly encourage local jurisdictions to define it as permit approved. So those are the two definitions of what phase one are: work that is done maintaining the 6-foot barrier and work that is done on existing construction projects. Our group is still working and discussing phase two, and phase two will include all other work and new projects. So it will incorporate anything that can be done, certainly on a residential construction job site, and we'll have additional requirements for that work being done within 6 feet of each other, but that'll be phase two. We're very close. The working group is very close in getting a final agreement on phase two, and we expect to send that document to the governor's office probably early next week, and then we'll be working on him to adopt that as quickly as possible as well, to open up these activities even more. But right now, phase one is that low risk definition. So what are some of the things that you have to do? The first thing that you have to do is right here in this first paragraph, and that is you have to have a site safety plan, a COVID-19 site safety plan for every job site, specific to every job site. Now, BIW has put together a sample plan, and we've made that available for you. If you go to the BIW website and click into our Restart Construction webpage, we have a sample job site plan right here for you, and you can pull that up. It includes everything that is required for a job site safety plan, and it's a template so that you can go through and customize it to your business. You can fill in everything's highlighted that needs to be customized, where you add in your company name, the location of the job site, everything. This plan has to be signed, so it has to be signed officially by the contractor, that's the general contractor for the site, and you need to have that plan available to be viewed at all times on the job site. So if an employee wants to see it or a regulator comes on site and asks for it, you have to be able to produce it. So that document's all ready for you. I know a lot of folks have already downloaded, customized it, and had it. I had one contractor who emailed me last night and had already done 21 different copies for his sites and sent me a picture of all of them, and they were all ready to go. So please download that and utilize as much as possible. It has everything. All these requirements that are listed below here are included in that thing, and you'll be good to go. You are also required to post on your job site a list of the work that will be performed, right here, the work that will be performed on the job site under this phase 1. And so, for each job site, you need to post it on your site. We also have a sample of that down here, right here. And so for each site, you've got to just very clearly just fill out this list, sign it, and post it on the job site. So this is the work that you're going to be performing on that site under phase 1. There are a number of postings that are required to be, or a number of requirements of postings on the job site, and I'll walk through each one of those, but that's the first one. I also want to point out you should review the DOSH Directive 1.70. That is L&I's DOSH Directive for COVID-19 safety as well. Here's a link here. It also is included in the site safety plan. You should review those policies. There are some additional policies that L&I talks about that aren't in the requirements. They're more recommendations. All the requirements are in here that you need to follow. But I would encourage you to review that as well. So in terms of the enumerated requirements, the first one I want to mention is the site supervisor. You need to identify what we call a COVID-19 supervisor for your job site. And this doesn't have to be a new employee. It can be an existing employee, just someone that takes that responsibility. They need to understand the safety plan. They need to understand all of the requirements. And basically their job is to monitor your sites to make sure that your employees are complying with all the requirements, staying within 6 feet, washing their hands when they sneeze, that they're wearing the PPE as required, all of that. So that's the responsibility of the site supervisor, but it is not supposed to be, it does not need to be someone new. In addition, you can appoint somebody already on your team. And then for residential construction, the site supervisor only has to be on the job site if there are 7 or more people. So if there are 6 or fewer people, they don't need to be on the job site. If there are 7 or more, the site supervisor needs to be on the job site. And I also want to add to that the site supervisor could be one of those 7 people. It doesn't have to be somebody in addition to the folks that are working. It can be one of those folks on the job site working. It's just an additional responsibility that they have to kind of monitor that at the same time. So again, you're not required to hire somebody new and have somebody extra on the job site just kind of standing around watching everybody. It can be one of those employees that you already have on the site working. So that's the job site supervisor. You are required to do training, and specifically COVID-19 specific training. You need to have one introductory training session at the beginning of the job with every employee. You have to have that same session with any new employee who comes onto the job site or that you hire. And then after you do that initial session, like many of you already do, you need to do a weekly training session in addition to the other training sessions that you do just on general job site safety. You also have to have a COVID-19 specific component. Now, we also, again, have created for you a summary of what that first original job site training can look like. The link is here, and you can pull it up and take a look at that. So you can just walk through that with your employees as an initial training that covers the requirement. And then BIW also plans on sending out on a weekly basis topics that you can use for your weekly trainings as well. So we will do our best to provide all that material for you. We'll email that out on a weekly basis. So, again, to try and make it as easy as possible for you to comply with this requirement. Next is the social distancing. Again, just spelling out that you need to keep 6-foot separation by every person on the job site at all times. There are exceptions, of course, for areas where hallways and things where people are gonna pass briefly at times, which is fine. You are required to kind of identify those and point those out and make sure that people are aware of them. Make sure that people aren't congregating in those areas. Make sure that during breaks and lunches that that employees are not grouping together, that they have to maintain 6 feet whenever they're on the job site. So, a practice of maybe going back and eating lunch separately in their vehicles, or just come up with a practice on your site that is going to create new habits for those employees. And this is going to take some retraining of habits for employees so that they are maintaining that 6-foot separation at all times when they're on the job site. Next thing I want to talk about is PPE, and this is also kind of an area of some confusion, so I want to address some of that. I'm happy to answer questions. PPE is required to be worn on the job site at all times, and PPE is defined in this case by gloves, face or eye protection, and face masks. Now, face masks does not have to be any sort of high-end face mask. It really is any cloth face coverings, and Department of Health and L&I are going to write that in their rules. And this can be any sort of homemade cloth mask. It can be a bandana. It can be anything that is recommended by the CDC of the Department of Health as a cloth face covering. If you have dust masks already on the job site and have them, just available to your employees, that works. It does not have to be N95s. It does not have to be any sort of other high-grade mask. Any sort of cloth face covering meets this requirement, but they do have to wear it at all times when they're on the job site. Now, this does not replace the requirements that are already there for safety for some tasks on the job site. So for L&I safety requirements that have some other ventilator that's required for doing that work, those requirements are still in place, of course. This is for when there isn't a mask required. They still have to wear some sort of facial covering at all times. Eye protection, just normal safety eyewear that all your employees probably should have, frankly. They just need to wear the eye protection at all time. And the same thing with gloves. Just work gloves are fine. They just need to have gloves on at all time. And the gloves just need to be appropriate for the task. So if it's just simple latex gloves at times, that's fine. Or if it's work gloves, whatever they would normally wear. But if it is a task that they wouldn't normally have a glove, they need to have a glove on if they're on the job site. So that is the PPE requirement. There's a lot of flexibility there, other than the fact that employees have to have the PPE on at all times when they're on the job site. Next I'll touch on a couple items on the sanitation and cleanliness. First is you need to have a washing station available for employees to wash their hands whenever they would like. And the preference is to have running water, soap and running water on a job site. If running water is not available, you can use some sort of portable wash station. It has to have soap. And employees have to have access to it whenever they would like. They are supposed to wash their hands before and after they use the restroom, before and after they eat, and if they ever cough or sneeze or blow their nose on the job site, they should go and wash their hands. I get it, they're wearing gloves, but at the same time, that is the best practice requirement, and it's what LNI is going to require. You can have also as an alternative, you can also have hand sanitizers available to your employees. They can use those as an alternative to wash their hands, and that is fine, but that is not considered a replacement for the water requirement for you to provide on site. So you still have to have a portable washing station on site, even if you have hand sanitizer, but the employees can use sanitizer instead of washing their hands as an alternative to cleaning. You are supposed to post another posting requirement, good hygienic practices. We have an example of that again on our job site that you can use and link to and just download and post that, but that's another posting requirement. And then you're supposed to frequently clean high-touch surfaces such as shared tools. So if they're sharing tools, you need to wipe down the tools with a disinfectant prior to them passing on to another employee. And you should also, if there are other kind of handrails, doorknobs, things that folks are frequently touching, you should be cleaning those kind of throughout the day on the job site as well. So keep that in mind. A lot of folks have talked about maybe having the site supervisor have that as kind of an additional responsibility. However you want to implement it is fine, but that you do need to be wiping areas down. This also includes a requirement that makes it clear here that this is not just new construction we're talking about, but we're talking about remodeling jobs as well. So if you're in a home that is occupied, you need to make sure that you sanitize everything when you arrive on site, and then also just before you leave. And anybody occupying the residence needs to stay at least 10 feet apart. Those that are occupying the home are not required to wear PPE, which is the reason why there's the 10-foot requirement as opposed to the 6-foot, because there's no requirement for them on PPE like it is for your employees, but you need to keep them about at least 10-foot distance from any of your employees in an occupied site. The next section gets into employee health and symptoms. You need to create policies for your employees around their health and wellness, and what to do if they come down with symptoms, if they get diagnosed with COVID. All of those procedures are laid out in our sample site safety plan. So you need to certainly familiarize yourself with those to make sure you're following them, but we have everything laid out here for you. You don't need to recreate that. You don't need to create new policies for yourself. Everything is laid out here that you need to follow. So that's all available for you, and everything in there would put you in compliance with all the requirements here. The one requirement that I want to point out here was something that was added at the last minute, and was something that was really a point of contention, to be honest with you, right at the end, because it wasn't anything that we talked about within our working group and the governor's office, and neither the governor's office nor Department of Health or anybody brought this up. And the governor's office insisted right at the very end that it get added in. And that is, and the governor mentioned it at the news conference, the requirement that you need to screen all of your workers at the beginning of the shift by taking their temperature and asking them specifically if they have any of these symptoms associated with COVID-19. If they answer yes to any of these, or if their temperature is 100.4 degrees or higher, they need to go home and quarantine and follow the quarantine steps. I know that this is an area that is going to be a challenge. It's not in anything that we've been promoting for you to get ready for. And procedurally, there's some thinking that needs to go on in terms of how to do this on a regular basis, how to do this in complying with the 6-foot requirements, all of that. Couple options we have come up with here is One, that you kind of set up a station on your job site where you have the thermometer and you have sanitizing wipes or hand sanitizer with a towel or something that you can sanitize the thermometer with. Have your employees one by one come up, take their temperature, announce the temperature to you standing 6 feet away, and then the next employee comes up, sanitizes, and does the same thing. Another option that you can do is have your employees take their temperature at home before they leave to come to the job site, and then call you and record, or call you with that temperature and answer those questions, and that should satisfy the requirement as well. There is no requirement to log their answers, so you do not need to keep a log of this information. You're only required to take their temperature and ask the questions. Once they've passed the test, they can get to the job site. If they don't, they go home. But you do not need to keep a record of this at all. That brings up the question of how it will get enforced. I've asked that question in the governor's office, and Elle and I will kind of have to figure that out, is what they've been telling me. But as long as you're able to produce a thermometer on site, and you can show that you've been doing it, or you tell them you've been taking it on a regular basis and conforming with it, the governor's office says that's good enough for them. So there's still some vagueness around that. I'm not happy completely with some of that direction. I'm certainly not happy that this ended up getting in here. Again, we tried to get some flexibility without having to keep the log in things, but it is a requirement. We'll try and get some other options and suggest some other things for you to do in order to comply. But it is something you're going to have to do on a daily basis with your employees. All of the rest of these requirements are in the document, in the safety plan, and so you'll be in compliance with them. The one other issue that I wanted to point out is this requirement, and this is true for any employer right now under COVID-19. If an employee does not feel like it's safe to be at work, they have to be allowed to go home. And then you've got to follow all of the requirements in the new Coronavirus Response Act that the federal government passed, and all the unemployment rules and things as well. But you do have to provide that flexibility for your employees under COVID-19 restrictions. If your employee wants to go home because they don't feel safe, you have to allow them to do that, even if they're not showing symptoms. So you have to provide that flexibility for employees. The final requirement that I want to talk about is this daily attendance log that you have to take. And this is required. You've got to keep track of everybody who is on the job site each day, employees and visitors. If you have, a delivery of some sort from a supplier and they come on the site, you've got to keep a log of that. The reason for this is it's a best practice for COVID-19. If one of your employees or one of those visitors ends up being diagnosed with the disease, what part of the reporting requirements with your local health department is you have to provide a list of everybody they've come in contact with, and those folks have to be contacted to let them know they've been possibly exposed. So that's the reason for this daily attendance log. We have a sample, again, available on the BIAW website. You can pull it up and utilize it to comply. But each day you've got to have folks sign in. They have to include their name, their phone number, their email address of everybody who comes on the job site. And you have to maintain this list or retain it for at least 4 weeks. And again, because if someone comes down with the disease, if they get diagnosed, we have to be able to, or the Department of Health has to be able to know how to notify who they've come in contact with. So that's the reason for this requirement. Just a quick, I will touch just quickly on the compliance or the enforcement issues. And this is going to be enforced by L&I completely. And they are putting together, working it into their regular inspection process, safety inspection process to roll out next week. And they will be handling all the enforcement. Jackson will get into that in a little bit. I also want to touch upon the fact that we were able to put in this document, and I was very insistent on this, that these practices or requirements are only required as long as the stay home, stay healthy order is in effect. Now, we will have to fight probably down the road with L&I and others about adopting some of these full time, but at least for now, we were able to get a time frame on these things that that these requirements will end once the stay-at-home order is no longer in effect. So, so we're pleased with that. That's certainly a fight down the road that we're going to have to continue, but we do have an end date for these as well. So with that, I guess, Hannah, I assume we've got some questions coming in, and why don't we now go back and try and answer questions.
Okay, so one of the questions I'm getting a lot is kind of the breakdown on the general contractor's responsibilities versus the sub's responsibilities in three major areas: supplying PPE, creating safety plans, and monitoring compliance. So how do you decide who is responsible for providing those things, and what risk is there in the other party, either the general or the sub, not complying?
That's a really good question, and it is not completely clear as to exactly how all that responsibility will break out in terms of enforcement. But ultimately, it is everybody's responsibility, which means it ends up landing on the general to make sure that everybody is in compliance. Every employer, every subcontractor is responsible for their own employees, but the general contractor is ultimately responsible for the job site and likely will be held accountable by L&I and others for their job site. This question about holding generals responsible for the safety violations of their subs has been one we've been fighting for a while now. But when it comes to COVID-19 specifically, it is going to be the responsibility ultimately of the general to make sure that compliance is happening on the site. Now, in terms of supplying PPE and things, that should be up to each contractor for the employees that they employ. But again, ultimately, it's going to be the general responsibility to make sure that compliance is going on.
Okay. Another question that we've gotten is, does this reopening apply to office staff or those who supply necessary goods for construction? And since the rules all seem tailored to large job site construction, how do they comply with these?
Great questions. And I know those things are not clear. One, on the supplier issue, yes, this authorizes all construction suppliers to start operations in accordance with either these rules when they're on the job site, or there are specific rules associated with office work that cover office personnel. So office personnel that work for contractors, if the contractor has an administrative office, that is authorized to start, and they need to comply with the L&I requirements for office work, and there is a document from L&I for that, and that's true then also for suppliers. The question has also come up about inspections, and government employees are already considered essential. A lot of local governments certainly had shut down inspections, shut down their permit processes. The expectation is that all of that will start again, that L&I will be out doing inspections, that local jurisdictions will be doing inspections, processing, doing everything that they do to move projects forward locally.
For suppliers, are they also required to keep like a job site log and those kind of things? Are they considered visitors? The log of friends and family, or log of visitors, has kind of popped up a lot on who should be included.
The log of visitors is the requirement of, the general who's responsible ultimately for the job site. The suppliers who visit a job site aren't keeping a log. They certainly would have to sign the log as a visitor to the job site, but the log requirement wouldn't apply to suppliers.
For smaller jobs that only require single-man crews and don't require permitting that have not begun yet, are those permitted under this phase?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one?
For smaller jobs, such as I've gotten window screen installing,
Yes.
things that
Yeah.
don't require permits,
Yes.
that haven't technically been begun but have been contracted for, can those go forward?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I'm going to have to ask as to how those will fit. Currently contracted, haven't started. I'm going to have to get clarification on that one. I would think so. The consistency would be there with the permitting if it's already if it was under contract before the stay-at-home order came in place, but I'd want to get clarification.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to read the questions. Does this change the requirements for essential businesses that were already ongoing prior to this change?
No, it does not. So essential folks, if you were essential, here is the change. So if a new project could be deemed essential, it could move forward. If it is an essential project that's already going, they need to comply with these new requirements. So if it's an essential job, or if it could be an essential job designated as essential as a new job, it could still move forward as an essential job. But if they're already operating as an essential job, they will have to conform and start complying with these new requirements.
I think the last general theme I'm getting is for excuse me, for travel or moving crews. If you have a single man or duo crew that go from site to site doing a specific task,
Mm-hmm.
How would you comply since the job site isn't fixed? And also, should they drive separately if they can't, to be able to get to the job site and create social distancing between those two folks?
They should absolutely drive separately. No question about that. I guess the clarification would be if they're going to sites where other work is happening, or if they're going to sites where no other work is happening, that's a little bit different scenarios.
It's not clear from the questions.
Okay. If they're going to a site where there is no other work going on and they're the only ones who will be doing work, then they need to have a site safety plan. They would be required to have that, and all the requirements they'd have to meet. If they're going to a site where other work is happening and they're just, they're going from multiple different job sites where other things are going on, then they're just there to do that portion of that work that's already, I would assume, outlined on the job plan that's posted.
Okay. Oh, and one other thing I've gotten several times is incidental breach of the 6-foot requirement. So if you're lifting a heavy object, for example, and it takes two people that have to stand closer together, is that allowed to go forward?
No, I would say, I think the answer to that is no. The way incidental is defined is just passing each other in the hallway or, some confined space, just quickly going by each other. If they have to work together in close proximity and lifting something into place, delivering in an appliance that takes 2 people to do it, or something like that, that would not be allowed. That work would not be allowed under the definition of phase 1. I wish that were different. That'll have to wait to phase 2, unfortunately.
Okay, I think those are the general themes.
Okay. All right. So next we're going to turn it over to Joseph, and he's going to walk you through some of how they have implemented this already or planning to implement in their own company, and provide you some samples, examples of that. So Joseph, go ahead.
Good morning. First, I want to thank Greg and Sherry for their leadership. My 21 year having a company, I never thought I would have to write an infectious disease plan to deal with the implementing COVID-19 requirements to our job site. I also have to thank my wife, Melissa, because as I was planning this presentation, she is the one that had to help write this, and we stayed up very late last night to get all this in. So it's very timely. Governor released it yesterday. We're all excited to get back to work. We have to do it safely. Also have to thank my team, because I couldn't do it alone. We have 13 at Irons Brothers, and everyone played a key role in making sure that we are being good role models, being good leaders as we implement this. We've been doing essential work this whole time. We've had 3 full kitchen remodels that we're in the middle of, and a couple other small essential jobs. So although 75% roughly of our daily work was done remotely, we've been completing some work on site during this. So I'll show you some of the practices we have put in place, and we've amended our plans, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, as the regulations kept changing. Because when we had the new latest and greatest, what the best practices from the CDC, from the World Health Organization, from LNI, from OSHA, from BIAW, and the National Association of Home Builders, we put them in place on our job sites. Let's see. With plans, I'm going to share my plan today. Your plan needs to be site specific to your company, to your employees, to manage the risks that you can take on. Not everyone's going to be able to get back to work with this. I'll show you how we've been able to manage it. And if you're able to do that, get back to work. If you can't, I would tell you wait till it's safe for you to get back to work. If you can't comply with what the governor is saying in this, you're going to jeopardize the whole construction industry. You're going to jeopardize our community and put the health of our community at risk. So please follow the plan. BIW has resources and templates on their website. They've been working with 13 local building associations throughout Washington State to compile best practices. They've also been working with the National Association of Home Builders to compile best practices, as well as OSHA, Department of Health, and everything else to make sure that we are having safe work environments. Like I said, today I'm going to review my plan. Safety was the goal for us from day one. If we were going to keep working, we want to make sure we had a safe work environment for not only our employees, our vendors, trades, partners, inspectors, homeowners, our community. So safety was always our first goal. And a lot of it we've had in place. There's definitely new things like 6-foot facial coverings, a lot of other things that are new to this. So let's get into some of this here. So I do want to reiterate, Sherry Schwab keeps reminding us, this is not business as usual. So as we've been navigating this, it's not business as usual. You need to change your plan. It needs to be specific to your companies, and you need to follow them. Without following them, we are putting our community at risk, and we do not want to be a bad example. We need to be the role models and build our way out of this. All contractors are required, like Greg said, to follow this COVID phase 1 return to construction plan. So please follow the rules. The governor, this was a slide I just picked up from my Edmonds News. I copied it from the governor's. Basically said what Greg said. We can return to work as long as we have the safety plan in place, social distancing, adequate PPE, COVID-19 site supervisor, control mitigation plan. And again, I'll go through my plan. The plan, key things were monitor employees' health, reporting the cases of COVID-19, and post-exposure follow-up and planning. This is unlike any other thing we have to plan on our work sites. We are already used to working in hazardous, dangerous environments. Snow comes, there's a picture of our van when it's snowing. We're going to operate in the snow. We will operate all year long. We make sure that we mitigate our risks by putting the best practice in place for the safety of everyone on site. COVID, like I said, is nothing I planned on doing. I did have the advantage of my wife being a past legal nurse consultant and surgery room nurse. Also, our safety officer is a certified nurse assistant, also current. So we do have a little nursing background in our office and in my family with doctors. So I have a little extra background there to make sure our plan was safe. Again, BIW website there. The job site safety is going to be key. Some of this, like I said, isn't new. We actually recently posted a safety Sally, which was back from our 2016. So this is not new. This is 4 years ago in our coloring book for kids, where we talk about hard hats, eye protection, which is required now, hearing protection, not required unless you need it on the job, but a mask for the right job, a safety vest, gloves, knee pads, boots. So a lot of this equipment we have, and it's not new to our industry. We just need to make sure it's implemented right for this plan. We've been the one big thing is I've been on Zoom calls and social calls from Facebook to Microsoft Teams to GoToMeetings, Adobe Connects for years. Never been on 8 hours a day for a week of them until now, but it is allowing us to practice that social distancing. It is allowing us to have those safety meetings. It is allowing us to have that team communication to make sure everyone is on the same page. So again, all job site teams need to be trained. We were very cozy with 13 of us in an office right before the closure went, and we were concerned about it. Our staff said, this is not safe anymore. We're on the Zoom platform now like this, so we're able to do all these meetings. But on site, that's gonna be a little different because not all the work sites are gonna be able to accommodate everyone we need. There's gonna be Zoom meetings with project managers, with other lead carpenters, with contractors. As we're trying to plan future site walks, instead of going to the job site now, we're planning them with a Zoom platform to get all of our trade partners there, orient them to the project so they know what they're going to encounter before they get there, as well as go over our site safety plans so they're up to speed what we're requiring of them as far as the eye protection, like Greg said, the masks, the facial coverings, gloves. Again, if gloves aren't required for the task, they still need to be wearing gloves and a facial covering on site. And this is for anyone on site, from delivery people, inspectors, homeowners, anyone else. Oh, actually, homeowners are exempt, but we have to keep 10 feet away from them. Hand washing stations. This is just one that we actually had on one of our sites already, because most of ours, we do a lot of whole house remodels, custom remodels, large remodels where we do a kitchen in there, and they still need a temporary kitchen set up somewhere. So we're used to putting some temporary sinks in, but these temporary sinks are not what we want to combine with our hand washing station, because we want what the homeowners using separate than what our team and field and any staff on site are using. Like Greg said, we have to have a hand washing station on site and abundant amount of water. We also have to clean and disinfect things. We provided these nice little bottles available at your local hardware store with disinfectant with all their staff. So they do have that in their, every staff has their own bottle and extra supplies of concentrate that they can make, refill and have disinfectant for frequently cleaning things. As Greg said, they're not going to be carpooling anymore. People aren't going to be sharing tools, and if they are, they need to be disinfected between. Obviously, if we have a jackhammer, we have two, but if someone uses one, it's going to get clean before and after, so the next person can clean it before and after and have a safe site. Trash collected has to be someone wearing gloves, but everybody needs to be wearing gloves, so that part didn't really make sense to me, because anyone in this practice has to have gloves on. Regarding wash stations, there's lots of options out there. This is one that we decided to build. If you go to Instagram or any of those Pinterest sites, you'll find lots of options of wash stations. I did include a few options. This one is pretty much available from any big box store, your local lumber yard, or maybe not lumber yard, but Ferguson Supply is a national company we work with a lot, and they can supply these. Here's a little more details on ours. We just capped off one of the supply lines, put a hose here with a connection, and put a little fitting in here in the middle to go from the, obviously, a hose bib. And some people say, what if there's not water on site? On new construction, you can have someone plumb in a hose bib from a water site. And if you don't have water, it is a requirement to have abundant supply. There's some other options I'll get to. This is just what we found was the most cost-effective use for us to do it versus renting one from the honey bucket. Where we put them on site is right by the entrance. This is on a porch as we enter a project site in the Green Lake area. This is in the Ballard area where we entered from the back side of the house. So you want it where they're going to come in and leave the home. So it's obviously well used for the purpose it is. Other thing is trying to keep the towels dry. Here we just have it under here, but there's other clever solutions of boxes, other things to make sure you have soap and somewhere they can dry their hands off. These are some other stations I saw on the left. A friend of mine, Sarah Henry with Gasper Handyman Construction. This is what they came up with. Little paper towel holder here, foot pump on the bottom, same on the right, there's another foot pump station, which is great. I think if it's a single operator, this is a great solution. If you have a lot of people, it may be a little tough to have multiple people use one little area like this. But this is an easy one to transport and get around. Other ones I saw were these like campsite stove things. So, I mean, you can make it into whatever temporary kitchen you want, but essentially this needs to be able to wash hands. What we had was nice and simple and easy. There's also these other ones. This one's here from IKEA, which you can buy a preset. I think probably it takes you 5 hours or simple from IKEA, but there's one there. This is a wash cube I saw. Also got email advertisements. I feel like the last 2 weeks we've had, or last 2 months, we've had nonstop advertisements for some type of product. The one on the right's over $1,000. One on the left, I think it's a couple hundred. Ours cost us, I think, $150 in parts, maybe 20 minutes to put it together. On job sites, just having contained sites, I would say try to contain the work area, because if we have a client on the other side of this area, that wall gives us a barrier that we don't have that 10-foot meeting. We don't have that 10-foot required anymore because we put a physical barrier up that's basically our wall to protect it. Some of our job sites are very confined spaces and they're occupied at home. So the more we can confine and separate that space, the easier it is for us to do our work. And these are all photos. A lot of these here are prior to COVID. These are just best practices working in occupied homes. So you can separate any of the hazardous environments from the occupants. Having it well organized, again, separating it so you have an entrance. On the bottom right here, you can see the entrance is coming from the back, and we're separating the homeowner use. So we're not having to worry about transmit of any infectious disease or any hazards on the site. Again, our goal is to manage the risks the most practical extent possible and maximize the efficiency. And that's been our goal before COVID. So here it's just trying to get the best practices in place. Some things we did do, we bought on the bottom left here, a few more of these site HEPA air movers, negative air machines, air scrubbers. There's some air movers here. We have HEPA vacuums at the bottom right, another negative machine, the yellow one there. We use these to minimize the dust on site. But for us, it's just a healthier environment for workers to be in. This is not a requirement. This is just some of our best practices. If worker reports feeling sick, we have to disinfect and clean that area immediately. So that's something that is in our plan. When working occupied homes, it says workers should sanitize the area upon arrival, throughout the workday, and immediately before they leave. And it says occupants should keep a personal distance of 10 feet from workers. So with that 10 feet, we're notifying all our homeowners, hey, we're not trying to be rude. We're happy to Zoom with you, but on site, it is not the best time to talk to us because we have 10 feet apart or we're talking between plastic. Monitoring employees' health. Workers are encouraged to stay home or leave the job site when feeling sick or they have been in close contact with a confirmed COVID-19 case. If during their shift they develop symptoms, acute respiratory illness, they must seek medical attention and inform their supervisor immediately. As well as workers shall inform the supervisors if their family member is homesick with COVID-19. The goal here is safety. We don't want anyone to spread this disease. And workers were self-identify the fever, cough, shortness of breath before their shift, midday, and at home. This was a plan we had based on the first requirements. Since then, it says we have to have someone else screen them and make sure they've had their temperature check and they don't have any symptoms. So as I said, our plan, we revised a couple times already. We'll be revising it again at our Monday all-staff meeting and make sure everyone's clear on this. Monitor employees' health. Greg went into this about the thermometer check. No, it's coming up, sorry. If there's any symptoms, they have to be free of them within 72 hours without the use of medicine. as recommended by the CDC before they can come back to work. And if they don't believe that it's safe to work, they need to remove themselves from the job site and notify their supervisor immediately why it's unsafe so they can take those next steps and precautions and make it safe. Failure of worker to comply with the plan, we will remove them from the job site. We don't want any subcontractor, vendor, supplier jeopardizing our right to work and anyone's health on site. Again, if someone's confirmed having that COVID-19 infection, they need to notify their supervisor. That's where we'll get into job logs and how we notify who was on site. The temperature info was just added. I found out that yesterday, and we went on Amazon and bought some thermometers fast. They were hard to find. Every local store I had some people go to didn't have anything in stock. We also bought these probe covers because we felt the thermometers, the ones on the left are usually $3. I think they're $20 now because of demand, little cost and supply issue there. But these probe covers we felt were the most sanitary way to have a thermometer, get a brand new clear probe cover they can put on, check, and then put the thermometer back. Does not mean we won't have disinfectant and cleaner there as well, but we want to make sure that we have the best practices in place, and the probe covers are very inexpensive. The thermometer on the right's a little more, and frankly, they're not really available right now. You can get them in a couple weeks at best that I saw. Site supervisor, like Greg said, any site that has 7 or more people on residential construction needs to have a site supervisor. For us, it was pretty easy. The project manager, lead carpenter for the job, guess what? That's their new duty, is job site supervisor. And it should be. They know the site best. They know the trades best. They're the ones that are going to be communicating with the trades and informing everyone of the policies. So that's what we decided was best practice for us. One caveat with that, as we've been doing essential work, we put in there or is otherwise noted, because some of our project managers are at home teaching their children with the new, doing homeschool, or I don't know what our kids are doing. We have our own manual arts program at home here. But as far as having the staff that can't come to work and manage those jobs, we can designate someone else, and we have. But with Zoom calls, we're able to keep everyone on the same page and make sure everyone knows what's going on. Signage, since the governor had that report line, we wanted to make sure that anyone that saw our staff working on site, they knew we had an essential job. So right on our yard signs up front, we posted worksite approved for essential work for the stay home order, and put the information that the governor's office sent us that allowed us to keep those job sites going. So if anyone had any questions, it was very clearly stated. They knew where to go to get more information. On the job, here's just 3 different boards on 3 different jobs here that we posted our job boards on. They're all the same because all of our jobs met the same practice. If we had a different practice for a site, we would have adjusted it. But we had our plans there, we had a response there, and best practices on there, as well as a sign-in log with an example. Job site visitors, anyone on the job site needs to sign in. Anyone needs to sign on that daily attendance sheet. They did change the daily attendance sheet requirements to add, I believe, email, phone number, so you can actually contact the person. It says the name and company. So we will be changing our log because we had name and company. We have contact information on file, but this will have every staff's contact information so you can get a hold of them if someone does have an exposure. Signage, again, these job boards are important. If you're not doing them, you need to have them up there. It needs to have your response plan along with other notices regarding the hygiene practices, sanitation, social distancing. And the board should be easily found on the job site and at the entrance of the job site so someone can sign in when they get there, they didn't forget to sign in. We need everyone in compliance. Wash stations, again, I said, this is the front door of one of our clients' homes. They're gonna be as they enter the home and leave the home, so they can clean before they go and when they leave. We also have notices on the doors or entries that talks about procedure to enter the Irons Brothers construction zone. And talks about sanitizing, cleaning, how all visitors need to wear disposable nitrile gloves at minimum, follow WSHA guidelines, follow check in with the project manager via phone or in person before leaving. We want to know who's in and out of that job site at all times right now. No more than 6 people, again, are allowed on site. It says anytime 2 or more people meet, they need to practice that 6-foot social distancing, and at least 6-foot separation must always be maintained by every person on job site. It's written and written and written so many times at 6 foot. We've been hearing on the news, you go to the grocery stores, it's there. We just need to follow it. There's a lot of good signage out there. These are two of the ones we like because it shows very clearly 6 feet, 2 meters apart, and keep that distance. Minimize interactions. So during pickup and delivery, try not to talk more than you have to. Just say thank you, get your job done, and move on, but keep that 6-foot separations. Again, everyone needs to sign in on the log. One other thing is we've only been allowing one trade partner on the job as we feel that's best practice at a time. And we've also been trying to minimize our sites to have 6 or less people. So well, we've had a lot less than 6 people on our sites. It's going to take longer. It is more cumbersome, but does allow us to continue to work, which is great. PPE, personal protective equipment, is still required for the tasks needed. This is Cody, one of our senior project managers. This is on a site where he was just demoing some soffits. And this is January of 2019. So it's, this is over a year ago. These cartridges we're still able to find at a local lumber yard to get refills, but they're selling one at a time. We do not have to wear a mask like this all the time on site. That's where the facial coverings come in. But if you're doing something that requires it, you still are supposed to have the right PPE. And it says it'll be required on all job sites. Again, appropriate gloves, eye protection. And it says no work is authorized without proper PPE. So make sure you have that. I'll give you some examples coming up. There's lots of face covering options. I don't know if I'd recommend this one. It's one I like to wear on my motorcycle. I put on because they wanted some visuals, put a big caution sign. You want to look friendly and comfortable to the visitors there and look professional. But face coverings can be anything that covers your face. It does not have to be a respirator unless you're doing a task that needs it. Eye protection must be worn at all times. And again, the gloves have to be worn. So I have orange gloves on here, eye protection, and facial covering. Here's, as I've been going shopping here and there, bottom left is a big box store where they actually had separate lines for contractors. The right line was DIYs. I wore a mask going in. I wore a mask when I walked my dog around the block to go to a fabric store to buy some fabric, as we handmade some masks and facial coverings. Here's my niece up top who modeled some sport team face coverings, and it's Scarlett, our administrator in our office, and she's been sewing them. These are two of her children right here in the middle. So you can make them for all sizes and shapes. You can simply put a bandana on as well, like this, cover. My wife was a surgery room nurse. We had a conversation with Sherry the other day. She was like, is it dangerous to have your face covered while you're communicating? She said, we were operating while bodies were open with a face covering on. So no, it is not dangerous to be working with a face covering on. You do have to take good precautions, and as well as stay 6 feet away. But we're used to seeing them in the stores now. They can be sporty, they can be fashionable, or they can just be a rag over your face. You do not need to have a respirator like on here unless you're doing a job that requires a respirator. You see the facial covering. Face shields are another option. A friend of mine here runs a daycare in the middle, and she didn't want her little kids not seeing their faces when they were working there. So they made sure that they got a face shield. That may apply to your job, it may not. These were pretty available on Amazon when I checked. They're pretty flimsy. I don't know how long they'll last. Top left, I pulled one out of my shop. It's not the most clear one. I wouldn't want to wear one like that. I'd rather just have a face covering. There's lots of face covering options. They don't want us using the N95 mask like the top right here. This is the old one I have because they should be used for the medical professionals. So try to use the cartridges on respirators if you have that job, or a face covering, bandana, something. Just don't look like gangsters on site. So try to look like you have the right face covering and representing your industry well. Again, this is a caution. I don't know if you'd go around like this at all your job sites. It may be fun to have some of those. You got to know your client and your job site to make sure what you're wearing. Some other things we have, again, the gloves, safety glasses, gloves, glasses. Again, another mask, Scarlett. This is in our front office. She's been the only one there maintaining our computers, servers as we work remotely, turning people's computers on and off, printing things, getting mail out, getting things moving. We put a shield here as a mail still gets dropped off there in packages. This is readily available at one of our suppliers. Just so it's when someone comes in, she had that spit shield or face shield. I think it was $85 we paid from McNamara Signs, a local company. They were able to get it same day. We do have relationships with them prior, so it was pretty easy to coordinate that. But we want to make sure we have a safe environment, not just on the site, but in the office staff, as someone said earlier. Are they allowed to work? L&I inspectors, there is that compliance line, also known as a snitch line. Know your plan. When I did receive a call, Scarlett did, and forwarded to me, gave me the number when the L&I inspector called us because someone reported us working. When I called him, I was able to tell him our plan in place. This was just earlier this week before it was open for other businesses. He was happy that I knew the plan. He said everything we were doing was under the plan. If you don't know your plan, you will get shut down. You will put a black eye on your industry. Know your plan, enforce your plan, make sure it's good for your company. And if an inspector calls, you need to represent your company and our industry well. So don't go to work if you can't work. If you can't provide a safe work environment, you should not be working. And I want to reiterate that because as much as we want to get back to work, we don't want people working if they can't do it right. That is what I have here. Any questions? I put another face cover in here. Again, not one I'd probably recommend on the site, but happy to take any questions.
So Hannah, I think we've got time just for a couple questions and then we'll move on to Jackson.
Okay, I will try to hit the main things.
Okay.
I think the biggest concern people have is with the hand washing requirements, how to get the hand washing stations set up. Is any running water and soap any appropriate hand washing station? And also, if you have multiple sites that are really close together, can you use the ratio that the rules require, the 5-to-1 ratio of toilets to hand washing stations across multiple sites? And whose responsibility is supplying those, the general or the subs?
As far as I know, the general contractor would be responsible for providing any hand washing station. The ratio, I can't answer that. I can tell you the CDC and every other health organization I've read is soap and water is much more effective than hand sanitizer.
And they do have to have soap and water, Hannah. Each site has to have a hand washing station. So you cannot have one for multiple sites. In terms of who's responsible, again, it kind of gets back to, the general is ultimately probably going to be held responsible to making sure, but I just try and coordinate as much as you can. If a sub's going to be on site for a number of days, maybe you can work it out that they take the responsibility for that portion of time or whatever, but communicate certainly, but a hand washing station needs to be on each individual site to comply.
Another question about the hand washing station that came up was the temperature of the water.
Yeah.
In the wax, and I think also in the rules, it has to be at least 60 or 70 degrees. If that requires heating, is that going to be enforced on these sites?
My understanding is that it won't be. It certainly is desirable to have the heated water, but and I will confirm that with L&I and try and get information out to folks. But my understanding is that in this specific case, especially if you're trying to supply water onto the site, that they will not hold you to that piece.
Okay. The last.
Hannah, I was going to say, I do know that stations like I have are all over the country going up right now, and I haven't heard that be an issue. I do know in the WAC it does say it has to be a temporal or good temperature water, but I haven't seen it enforced.
Okay. And then the last thing the other thing that's come up a bunch of times is what happens when there's a conflict between existing safety requirements. So I've seen a lot of people ask about, so wearing gloves while using a table saw is generally unsafe, but we have to wear gloves all the time now. What do we do in situations where other safety requirements conflict?
That's a great question. I'll have to speak with L&I about that, but in our conversations with them up to this point, the requirement was you had to have a glove, and I would guess that would supersede in at least while you have to do the COVID requirements, that would supersede the other restriction. But I will confirm that with L&I. I'll make a note of that and ask that specifically. But that is my understanding, is the way that it will be enforced, is that the requirement for glove would supersede it, at least during this time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. What I read is if there's an appropriate glove for the task, if there's not one required, you have to wear a minimum of a latex or nitrile glove.
Right, correct.
Okay, if we don't have time for any more, then I guess that's it.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. I really appreciate you doing this. That was a huge help, I think, for folks to see examples of what you're doing on the job site, and so they can see some things that you know, that they can incorporate on their own job site. So thank you very much for your time and putting all that together for us. Next, we're going to move on and talk a little bit about enforcement, as I mentioned before. And to cover that, we have Jackson Maynard. Jackson is the general counsel at BIAW, so he's going to spend a couple minutes answering, I think, spending some topics on questions that we've already been getting a bit of, and then we'll have some questions for him. And then if we have time at the end, we'll try and answer some just kind of additional general questions before we close out. So go ahead, Jackson.
Thanks, Greg. Once again, Jackson Maynard, General Counsel for the Building Industry Association of Washington. I'm going to move very quickly through the enforcement part of this. I know the last thing that 600 people want to do on a Saturday morning is listen to a lawyer. So I understand that, but we did want to be sure that you were clear on how the new restrictions would be enforced, and you know, how that would work going forward. The first thing I did want to do is read a brief disclaimer, again, since I'm a lawyer, just so you're clear on what the webinar is and is not. The information provided in this webinar is not intended to be legal advice, but guidance for informational purposes only. There's no intent to create an attorney-client relationship. You should contact your attorney to obtain advice with respect to any particular issue or problem that you're facing. So now that we kind of got that out of the way, let me talk about enforcement of the governor's order generally. Prior to the issuance of the most recent guidance, the governor has stated repeatedly that enforcement of the stay-at-home order would be done in 3 ways. The first would be with a warning. The second would be regulatory in nature, which could include license suspension, your permits being potentially pulled, the Attorney General using enforcement of the consumer protection provisions in the law, and I think in at least one instance involving a landlord, he did this. And then potentially L&I or other appropriate agencies. And then the final step that the governor has mentioned is potentially law enforcement arresting. Violation of his order is punishable as a gross misdemeanor. Now, in the phase 1 requirements that Greg went through earlier, and Leah, if you have the ability to pull that up, sorry to put you on the spot, feel free to pull that up, but if you don't, that's okay. There's some specific provisions indicated in there as to how the requirements in this will be enforced. So first of all, that phase 1 requirements document states that it would be enforced under the authority of the WISHA Act, the Washington Industrial Safety and Health Act, by L&I's Division of Occupational Safety and Health, so DOSH, and that they're going to have jurisdiction to enforce this statewide. So the most likely entity that you're going to see showing up on your job site to see if you're complying with all the requirements in phase 1 will be an L&I inspector. It's also important to note that in the document they say that all of the requirements are going to be strictly enforced. So the fact that you're not complying with, or maybe you're trying to, you comply with, let's say 28 out of them, but 1 or 2 you're still kind of working on. I would not rely on the fact that you're working on those other ones because it does say that all of them are going to be strictly enforced. The question is, well, what can happen to you? And it says again in the document that failure to comply will result in shutting down operation until the contractor can meet and maintain all requirements. So thanks, Leah, for bringing up that document. Some of these provisions are contained in there, but basically you're going to get red tagged. I mean, that's how I'm reading that. We'll have to see exactly how L&I, what mechanism they use to enforce it, but based on the documents that I reviewed from DOSH, just in how they treat situations, they're going to strictly enforce this. They're going to treat this as a serious health threat, and you could find your job site potentially red tagged until such time as you can meet and maintain those requirements. So that's essentially how we anticipate enforcement will work. I would not rule out, however, as Greg mentioned, there will be other entities on the job site. There could be inspections from local governments. There could be other regulatory local government entities that have some enforcement authority that may be involved as well. So I didn't want you to be surprised by that. I think primarily it'll be enforced by L&I. And then, for those who are just, and hopefully there's not going to be a lot of these, but for those who are just saying, forget it, I'm not going to abide by any of this, I think that there still is the potential likelihood of criminal enforcement for those who are just clearly not trying to comply with any of this. And I think you need to be aware of that. I think also that there is potential legal liability in terms of tort, either by suits brought by your employees or other people. I mean, the fact there is a significant health crisis going on, and while there may be difficulty in proving that a particular person got sick from your failure to comply with a safety requirement, I think that legal liability is a potential threat. And I know that within the trial bar, there are already discussions about how potential suits can take place. So your failure to follow some of these safety requirements could be used as evidence in a potential lawsuit against you. So I think also, practically speaking, if there's a lot of evidence that folks are not complying with these phase 1 requirements, it makes it much harder for Greg and the others in the work group to then complete the negotiations they need to on phase 2 and be able to open up even more construction, let alone get to the point where we can get back to normal without these restrictions once the threat of COVID-19 has passed. So that's essentially what I have on enforcement, largely done by L&I, potential possibly for some other entities to be involved as well. And you have the potential to have your job site shut down. I'm going to quickly go through some common questions that we've received since the governor's order. So Leah, that would be the final slide, if you can switch over to that for those questions. And I think the first one, if I recall correctly, was, yeah, here it is. If a site is found to be conducting phase 2 work, what's the repercussion? Again, these are going to be strictly enforced. If L&I is there, they have the authority. If you're not maintaining those 6 feet of separation between folks, you have the potential to be shut down until such time as you are going to comply. In addition, you could face fines and other penalties that you would face in a normal red tag situation. So just be aware of that. For the second question, if an employee refuses to return to work, what are the options? Well, that was referenced on that other phase 1 document, that you should allow employees, if they're concerned about the potential of contracting the disease and do not wish to come to work, you should allow them under a family and medical leave or other leave options to not work. They don't have to necessarily be sick to not come into the job site. If they're simply concerned or afraid, you should, under these restrictions, allow them, pursuant to your policies, to take leave and to stay home until such time as they are comfortable returning. Who is responsible for enforcement? As I said, largely L&I, but potentially other entities depending on the nature of the violation. There could be fines, and the process to shut down the sites is the same as would be used with red tag. Essentially, they would put on the red tag, shut down the job site, you would have an opportunity potentially to appeal, and L&I can also seek a temporary injunction to permanently shut down the site if they don't think you're going to comply with the restrictions. And then you also face, frankly, potential criminal prosecution as well for violations of the governor's order. So there are a number of things that could come into play as far as a process to shut down the sites. I think those are the major questions. Hannah, do we have any others from the folks attending the seminar?
Yes, we do. One of the big questions that I've gotten is there a document or description somewhere that defines what exactly phase 1 is, phase 2 is, etc., to kind of show people what to expect in the next phases?
Yeah, as Greg said, and this is in the document, phase 1 is work that can be completed maintaining that 6 feet of separation between workers. And also it's existing construction, and so it's construction, as he said, that had either been permitted. I think he's looking into whether it's previously contracted, but I think actually if you don't require a permit and you have a contract and you were going to start work before all of this kind of took place, that probably will be deemed as not new construction. But yeah, that is phase 1. It's not dependent on the specific work performed or the type of work performed at a job site. It's basically anything you can do in which you can maintain that social distancing requirement of 6 feet on a project that was pre-existing.
And do we have a definition for phase 2?
Phase 2 is, as Greg said, will be anything you can do that would not require the 6 feet. And also could involve new construction.
Yes. So
Okay.
Hannah, our assumption is, at least for residential, that phase 1 and phase 2 will cover pretty much everything involved in what we do. Phase 3, there will be a phase 3 document, but that's to deal with some specific scenarios in really complex and large commercial and transportation projects. So phase 1 and phase 2 will be close to 100% of anything we do in residential.
Okay. Another question that I've gotten is, what about family member work crews? So if they're in the same household, husband and wife team, for example, can they ride together or work together closer than 6 feet? How do they note if they are family members that there is no risk of their distance being smaller than that?
Yeah, there is no family member exception to the rules. Now, I mean, riding to the job site, I think a lot of these kind of kick in at the job site. So you probably could get by with that. But as far as the need to log in, the need to post all of this, there is no family member exception. So you need to follow all of these, even if you are in business with a family member.
Okay. A question about L&I inspectors. Do they need to give you advance notice that they're intending to enter your work site? And could you require that by putting up no trespassing signs, or do they have full range to just come on?
So under the statute, they do have authority to inspect. You can tell them they can't come on to your property, so you can refuse. They have to have consent to be able to search your site or to do the inspection. However, they would then get a warrant. It's relatively easy for them to get a warrant, and then they could come on with a warrant. And yeah, you can tell them temporarily that they can inspect your a private property, but ultimately that will only keep them away temporarily, and they would be able to get around that by getting a warrant.
Another question I've seen is, if someone in the company gets diagnosed with COVID-19, is it possible that a quarantine order could be put on the whole company?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
If there is a diagnosed case of COVID-19 on a job site or in a company, is it possible that the whole company or job site could be placed under quarantine?
I will answer that, Jackson.
Thanks.
Yes, the answer is yes. It will depend on who that employee has been in contact with during the time frame that Department of Health has that requirement. I think it's 72 hours prior to diagnosis. I think it's 3 days if I remember right. But you'd have to work with the health department to comply with all that, and it would depend then on who they've come in contact. But if over that time period, theoretically, if they had come in contact with everybody either on the site or everybody in the company, then it is possible, yes. That is not unusual. I mean, that's no different, however, than what is the practice now for essential companies or anybody who's operating. If there's a case within a business, you have to follow those rules and requirements that were already in place. So there's no difference to that with these regulations, but certainly that scenario is possible.
What about people or jobs that had already been deemed essential that require violation of the phase 1 guidelines but have an essential determination? So for example, if they were given a authority or determination to install a certain type of appliance, but there's no way to do that while maintaining a 6-foot distance,
Right.
Can they go forward?
They can. So I know there is some vagueness, and what I talked about before is the requirements will be put towards those projects, but there will be some exceptions to that, because there are some projects that are deemed essential. They have to get done. I'm talking about medical facilities that have work to do and things like that, and so L&I will adjust accordingly. But generally, they're going to try and apply these new requirements onto those sites too, and they're doing that because they do want consistency out there as much as they can, so that there isn't confusion. But there are going to be some exceptions like that for essential projects, because those projects do need to get completed. So they'll work with that.
Another question that's come up is how to direct subs and subs employees without crossing the line into making them your employees, especially with regards to making sure they take their temperature and those kind of things. Is that the general's responsibility? How do they walk that line?
So as Greg mentioned, we've had kind of an ongoing dispute with L&I about, and actually have litigated this somewhat in court, as to the extent of a general contractor's duty and how that may or may not overlap with subcontractors in terms of their duty to keep a safe work site. Recently, the state Supreme Court issued an opinion in Vargas that said that those duties are concurrent, that they're basically coextensive. And so I think to be safe, the general contractor should take every reasonable step you can to ensure that the subcontractors are complying. And if a subcontractor is refusing to comply, then you should dismiss them from the job site, or take whatever steps you need to pursuant to your contractual arrangement with them for their failure to comply with laws. But I think there is a very strong chance that both the general and the sub will be popped for safety violations under these strictly enforced guidelines. So you should be aware of that. I think you need to be prepared that that is how L&I will intend to enforce it, and general should recognize that they will have a responsibility to keep the job site safe.
And Hannah, I'll add too. I understand, folks. This is, these are additional requirements. They're frustrating to have to accommodate to. There's costs associated with accommodating. There's lost time associated with having to implement these procedures on a regular basis. I totally understand that. But understand too the situation that we're in, and it is in all of our best interests to make sure that job sites are in compliance with this thing. And if we're not, if there's wide non-compliance, and L&I catches that, we also, please be aware that the press is probably going to be out monitoring our sites to some degree as well. There's been a lot of attention associated with our advocacy to try and get construction started again, and so I fully anticipate the press will be out there watching and making sure that job sites are trying to be in compliance. It is in our best interest. We all need to be accountable to meeting these requirements and complying on the job site. So please work with your subs. I mean, just work it out. I get that it's extra cost and it's extra responsibility and it's extra time, but it's in all of our interests to make sure it happens. So, work it out on your sites, make sure that the folks are following the rules, that you're both general and subs are monitoring employees and making sure things are getting done right. Otherwise, if there's widespread non-compliance, we risk the governor rescinding this, and that, I don't want to see that happen, certainly. That's not best for anybody, and it wouldn't be great for the industry overall either, to kind of have that black eye. So please, work it out and get your folks in compliance.
I've gotten a question several times that I just want to speak to. There's a bunch of examples being asked about, can I do this particular task that requires me to be less than 6 feet apart? No. Yeah, there is no situation in which you are allowed to do work that requires you to be less than 6 feet apart. That includes writing together. That includes installing a tub. That includes installing windows. So I'm not going to pass all those questions on, but that's really the big takeaway here, is that's not phase one work. And that's why at the beginning, when Greg was talking about just defining what the scope of the work you're doing is, he said to list the tasks that you were going to be doing, not just the job. So if the task of installing a granite countertop, for example, can't be done at less than 6 feet, but putting in the cabinets can, then on your plan, say you're installing cabinets, don't say you're installing countertops, and then don't install the countertops.
That's right. That's exactly it, Hannah. Yeah. Now we're getting on past 11, almost 10 minutes after. Do you have, or maybe just one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap things up?
Do we have any recommendations for them for how to find PPE or where to get it? Because everybody is having a really hard time. Yeah.
And I know especially the thermometers are a real challenge. And then also maybe the wash stations. We will put together some resources for you. I know a number of the local associations are also trying to gather some resources, but we will create a resource page probably connected to or right with the safety requirements page, and we'll try and provide some options for you. Again, don't feel like you have to get some sort of specific thing on the facial requirement, the face coverings, but the other things, especially the thermometers and the wash stations, I know might be a challenge. So we will try and step in and provide some resources.
Okay, I think those are the general themes. There are obviously a ton of more specific questions that we are going to try to get to, you guys, but I think that's a big picture.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for being with us. I hope this was helpful. If you did ask specific questions, we will keep track of those. We will try and get emails back to you over the next couple days to respond to your specific questions. In the meantime, I want to make sure that you know to get to the BIAW website and to get to that safety page, just scroll down on that front page and click on that photo down there, and it gets you to all those materials. We have everything you need to get your job site up and running, and hopefully as quickly as possible. If you have other questions too, we had the contact information for BIAW. I don't know if Leah, maybe you can put that back up there. Sorry, I jumped the screen there, but please email us, call, and we will do our best to get you answers or clarifications as best we can. We want you out working safely and in compliance with this stuff as quickly as you can get out there. So have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you very much for being with us, and take care. Bye-bye.